The morning Elias Mercer's name echoed through the dusty auction hall, it felt less like a victory and more like a quiet miracle. The hammer fell, sharp and final, and just like that, a broken-down ranch no one else wanted became his. Wind rattled the loose tin roof above him, and sunlight spilled through cracked windows as if the land itself was exhaling after years of neglect. Elias stood there holding a thin folder of papers, his hands rough from decades of work, his heart heavy with memories and hope intertwined. He had lost more than he ever talked about, and this land was not an investment to him. It was a second chance. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet perseverance, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel name, because stories like this survive only when people choose to care. The ranch sat miles away from the nearest town, folded into a series of rolling hills that changed color with the seasons. In spring they turned soft green, in summer they baked to a dusty gold, and in winter they hardened into a kind of beautiful loneliness. Elias had grown up not far from here, the son of a ranch hand who taught him that land remembers how it's treated. When his father died young and his mother followed years later, Elias drifted through jobs, through grief, through a marriage that dissolved under the weight of long hours and silent sorrow. Buying this ranch was his attempt to put roots back into the ground, to prove to himself that something could still be built slowly and honestly. The first months were brutal but honest. Elias repaired fences one post at a time, his back aching but his spirit oddly lighter. He slept in a small trailer with a heater that barely worked and cooked simple meals under an open sky. Each sunrise felt earned. Each sunset felt like a promise. Neighbors were distant but polite, offering nods instead of words. They had seen too many dreamers come and go. Elias understood. He didn't need approval. He needed time. Then, one afternoon, black SUVs appeared on the dirt road like dark beetles crawling toward his hills. They did not belong. Their tires kicked up controlled clouds of dust, and their paint reflected the sun in a way that felt aggressive. Men in pressed shirts and hard hats stepped out, their boots clean, their expressions rehearsed. They carried maps and folders, and their eyes kept drifting past Elias toward the ridgeline behind his barn. The hills he had already begun to think of as home. Within minutes, Elias understood that his quiet miracle was being challenged by something vast and impersonal. A global mining company, backed by investors and governments he could barely imagine, claimed that beneath his land lay minerals worth more than his entire lifetime of labor. They spoke of progress, of opportunity, of national interest. They spoke as if the hills were already theirs and he was simply standing in the way of inevitability. At first, Elias believed it was a misunderstanding. He had won the land legally. He had the papers. But letters began arriving, thick envelopes filled with language designed to intimidate. Environmental impact assessments he had never seen. Access requests that sounded more like demands. Offers of money that would have erased his debts 10 times over, yet somehow felt like an insult. Every time he stood on the hill at dusk, watching shadows stretch across the grass, he felt a tightening in his chest. The land was no longer just soil and stone. It was being hunted. The pressure escalated quietly but relentlessly. Survey markers appeared near his fences. Drones buzzed overhead like mechanical insects. The company representatives returned, their smiles thinner, their patience shorter. They talked about legal battles Elias could not afford, about eminent domain, about the way the world worked now. At night, Elias lay awake listening to the wind and wondering how a single man was supposed to stand against something so large. Fear crept in, followed by doubt. Maybe he was foolish to believe this place could ever be his in peace. What kept him grounded were the small things. A stray dog that began following him during fence repairs. The way rainwater collected in a shallow basin near the hills, reflecting the sky like a mirror. The memory of his father's voice telling him that land fights for those who fight for it. Elias began documenting everything, taking photos, keeping journals, learning the history of the ranch. He discovered old records showing families who had lived and worked there generations ago, caretakers rather than owners in the truest sense. The hills were more than mineral deposits. They were witnesses. Word slowly spread. A local schoolteacher wrote about the situation online. A regional journalist came to take photos, drawn by the image of a lone rancher standing against a multinational corporation. Environmental groups reached out, not with promises but with questions and respect. Elias found himself speaking at small community meetings, his voice shaking at first, then steadying as he realized people were listening. He was not just defending his land anymore. He was giving voice to something many felt but few dared to confront. The company responded with escalation. Legal notices piled up. Deadlines were set. The stress etched itself into Elias's face, carving lines deeper than the sun ever had. There were days he considered signing away the hills, taking the money, disappearing somewhere quiet. But every time he imagined leaving, he felt an ache sharper than fear. The ranch had changed him. It had given him purpose when he thought he was empty. As the case moved forward, something unexpected happened. Independent studies commissioned by activists revealed fragile ecosystems in the hills, rare species that depended on the land remaining untouched. Historical societies uncovered cultural significance tied to the terrain. Public opinion shifted. What had been framed as a simple business expansion began to look like a reckless erasure. The company's certainty faltered, replaced by careful statements and delayed actions. Elias stood on his porch one evening, watching clouds roll in heavy and slow, and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not victory, not relief, but belonging. Regardless of how the battle ended, he had already changed. He had chosen to stand, to care, to fight without violence or bitterness. The land responded in its own quiet ways. Grass grew thicker where he tended it. Wildlife returned cautiously, then confidently. The hills seemed to breathe easier. Months later, the announcement came not with drama but with restraint. The company withdrew its access demands, citing revised priorities and community concerns. There was no apology, no admission of wrongdoing. But the hills were safe. For now. Elias folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, then stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The wind moved through the grass like a soft applause he did not need but deeply.